What let us outlive every other human species? Right now, there is exactly one species of human on Earth, you. That has not always been true. For almost the entire 2 million year history of our genus, it wasn't true at all. At times, there were as many as 6 or 7 different human species alive on the planet simultaneously. Different bodies, different brains, different tools, different ways of surviving, all of them equally human by any reasonable definition of the word. This is the story of that world. Who was in it? What it actually looked like when they crossed paths? And why none of them are here anymore, except us? Before we get to the roll call, it's worth asking a simple question most people never think to ask. What actually makes something human in the first place? It's not just the shape of a skull. Scientists who study this use a cluster of traits: walking upright, tool use, brain size relative to body, social behavior, sometimes symbolic thought. And under that definition, dozens of species over the last several million years have qualified. Most of them are long gone by the time Homo sapiens shows up, but a handful were still around, overlapping with us, sharing the same rivers, the same coastlines, the same weather. Let's take the roll call. In Europe and Western Asia, the Neanderthals, stocky, powerfully built, adapted for cold with a barrel chest and a brain that was, on average, slightly larger than ours. They controlled fire, buried their dead, made jewelry from eagle talons, and cared for injured members of their group well enough that individuals with serious disabilities survived for years. There's a Neanderthal skeleton from Shanidar Cave in Iraq, an individual with a crushed eye socket, a withered arm, and advanced arthritis who nonetheless lived to what would have been an old age for his time. That doesn't happen without someone else keeping him fed and protected. They weren't a lesser draft of us. They were a fully separate, fully successful branch of the human family, running their own territory for far longer than Homo sapiens has existed. They coexisted with us in that region until roughly 40,000 years ago, and we know they weren't strangers to us. Most people with non-African ancestry carry 1 to 2% Neanderthal DNA today, direct evidence that the two species interbred. Further east, the Denisovans. This one's strange because we've barely found them at all. The entire physical record of an entire human species is a finger bone, a jaw fragment, and a handful of teeth, discovered in a single cave in Siberia called Denisova Cave, which is also where the species gets its name. We don't know what they looked like. We don't have a face to put on them. But genetics tells a bigger story than the bones do. Their range likely stretched much further across Asia, and modern populations in parts of Asia and Oceania, especially Melanesians, carry meaningful Denisovan ancestry, up to 4 to 6% in some groups. An entire species reconstructed almost entirely from its genetic fingerprint in the people who came after. And here's where it gets almost unbelievable. In 2018, researchers analyzed a bone fragment from that same cave and found something nobody expected. A girl, roughly 13 years old when she died, whose mother was Neanderthal and whose father was Denisovan. Not a distant hybrid ancestor. A first-generation child of two different human species who lived and breathed and probably had no idea her parents came from separate branches of the family tree. Researchers nicknamed her Denny. She's the single clearest piece of physical evidence we have that these weren't just distantly related populations bumping into each other. They were close enough to have children, and it happened more than once. On the island of Flores, in Indonesia, Homo floresiensis, nicknamed the Hobbit the moment it was discovered, because there was no other honest way to describe it. Adults barely a meter tall, with a brain roughly the size of a chimpanzee's, and yet capable of making stone tools and hunting stegodon, a species of pygmy elephant that also evolved its small size in isolation on that same island. They lived on Flores for an extraordinarily long time, surviving until roughly 50,000 years ago, long enough to have potentially overlapped with modern humans reaching the same region. How do you end up with a tiny human on an island with tiny elephants? It's a real evolutionary phenomenon called island dwarfism. When large animals get isolated on islands with limited resources, they shrink over generations. Small animals, without predators, sometimes grow. Islands are strange evolutionary laboratories, and Flores produced one of the strangest results in the entire human story. In the Philippines, Homo luzonensis, a small-bodied species discovered so recently, the remains were formally identified in 2019, that most people have never even heard the name. Dated to at least 50,000 to 67,000 years ago. Known from just a handful of bones and teeth, with a strange mix of primitive and modern traits that doesn't cleanly fit anywhere else on the family tree. Some of their toe bones look almost more like something you'd expect from a much older, more ape-like ancestor. We genuinely don't know what to make of them yet, which in a field like this usually means there's a much bigger story still buried somewhere. In South Africa, Homo naledi, discovered in 2013 deep inside a nearly inaccessible cave system called Rising Star, reachable only through a chute so narrow that the excavation team had to recruit archaeologists small enough to physically fit through it. Homo naledi had a brain about the size of an orange. By every assumption paleoanthropologists use to make, that should mean minimal capacity for complex behavior. Except the location of the remains tells a different story. Dozens of individuals, deep inside a cave system that's genuinely difficult for a grown adult to navigate even today, with no signs the bodies washed in or were dragged there by predators. The leading interpretation is that Homo naledi was deliberately placing its dead there. Ritual behavior. From a brain a third the size of yours. Their remains date to roughly 250,000 years ago, putting them in the same broad era as the earliest Homo sapiens, a genuine challenge to the old assumption that big brains are a prerequisite for complex behavior. And finally, Homo erectus, the marathon runner of the human family. First appearing roughly 2 million years ago, it's one of the longest surviving human species in all of prehistory, holding on in parts of Southeast Asia until possibly around 100,000 years ago or later, potentially overlapping with early modern humans moving through the same territory. Homo erectus was likely the first of our relatives to control fire, the first to leave Africa, and the first to look recognizably human in its proportions. For nearly 2 million years, it just kept going. And then, quietly, it didn't. That's 6 populations. 6 different ways of being human, existing at overlapping points in time, most of them almost certainly unaware the others existed at all. And there may have been more. Species known only from a single tooth or a fragment of jaw, nameless ghosts in the fossil record that we simply haven't found or haven't named yet. They weren't spread out to avoid each other either, not entirely. Homo sapiens moved through territory that Neanderthals, Denisovans, and others had already been living in for hundreds of thousands of years. These weren't separate planets. They were neighbors, sometimes rivals, sometimes, as Denny proves, family. So what did coexistence actually look like day to day? In some places, it looks like avoidance, populations that seem to have kept their distance from each other for thousands of years at a stretch based on the archaeological layers we find. In some places, it looks like competition, different human species converging on the same herds, the same caves, the same river valleys, with only so much to go around. And in some places, it looks like something closer to family, modern humans and Neanderthals having children together, modern humans and Denisovans, Neanderthals and Denisovans doing the same. Populations that were distinct enough to be called different species under most definitions, but not distinct enough to stop any of that from happening. And then, one by one, 5 of those 6 populations disappeared. The timing is the part that's hard to look away from. Homo floresiensis holds on until around 50,000 years ago, right as modern humans are believed to reach Flores. Homo erectus fades out on a strikingly similar timeline in Southeast Asia. Neanderthals vanish from the fossil record around 40,000 years ago, not long after Homo sapiens arrives in Europe in serious numbers. Again and again, across completely different continents and completely different environments, the exit of the previous occupants lines up with the arrival of us. That's not proof of a coordinated extinction campaign. There's no mass grave, no smoking gun, but it's a pattern too consistent, repeated on too many separate continents to dismiss as coincidence. The more likely explanation is quieter, and in some ways more unsettling. Sustained competition, tilted heavily in one direction. Homo sapiens had long-range weapons, spears, atlatls, eventually bows, the ability to hunt and defend from a distance without needing to get close enough to be hurt. We had larger, more interconnected social networks, meaning knowledge about food, danger, and opportunity spread faster and further across a population. We may have had a more complex, recursive language, the kind that lets you plan ahead, describe things that aren't in front of you, coordinate with total strangers, and pass detailed knowledge down through generations with real precision. None of that made other human species weak, or stupid, or somehow lesser. It made the competition for the same shrinking resources brutally uneven. Climate didn't help. The period from roughly 70,000 to 12,000 years ago swung through repeated ice ages, sea levels dropping and rising by over 100 meters, entire landscapes flipping from livable to frozen tundra and back again within a few thousand years. Add a possible volcanic winter from the Toba eruption in Indonesia around 74,000 years ago, an eruption so massive that ash from it has been found as far away as South Asia and East Africa. And you get populations that were already isolated and already competing, hit with a climate crisis that gave them nowhere left to retreat to. Even Homo sapiens barely made it through this stretch. Genetic evidence points to a population bottleneck sometime in this era that may have dropped our entire species down to just a few thousand individuals worldwide. Every person alive today may descend from that narrow surviving population. We weren't guaranteed to be the ones left standing either, we just were. So when you add it up, climate stress, direct competition for territory and food, populations getting fragmented into groups too small to recover, some interbreeding that blurred the lines between us and them, and in at least some cases, likely violence between competing groups. That's what emptied a planet that used to hold 6 different kinds of humans down to just one. Not a single dramatic event, not a war with a start and an end date, a slow, compounding squeeze applied from multiple directions at once over tens of thousands of years, quiet enough that no single generation would have experienced it as an ending. Just a world that got a little smaller, a little less crowded, one lifetime at a time. What's left of that world isn't nothing, though. It's genetic. It's fragments of Neanderthal and Denisovan biology still doing quiet work inside people alive today. An immune system shaped by one, a high-altitude adaptation in the Tibetan highlands inherited from the other. It's Denny, a single girl who lived for maybe 13 years, whose existence tells us these populations weren't just neighbors. They were, at least sometimes, one family. But the populations themselves, the actual living, fire-building, child-raising communities spread out across 4 continents, those are gone. For most of human history, human meant several different things at once, walking the same earth, sometimes never meeting, sometimes competing, sometimes raising children together. Right now, for the first time in nearly 2 million years, it means exactly one thing: you. So here's a question for you. Of the 5 human species we just lost, Neanderthals, Denisovans, the Flores hobbits, Luzonensis, Naledi, Erectus, if you could bring just one of them back, which one would you want to meet? Drop your pick in the comments. If you want more of this kind of history, don't forget to hit like and subscribe. It genuinely helps this channel keep going.